was very, very much about that kind of a theme of the arts and visualizing the city and so on and so forth. So I would like to have you introduce yourself, actually, because I'm just popping in here. And then if I could receive, please, that thing down there. Thanks so much.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lalia Guy. I work at Culture Lab in Newcastle, and I'm part of a research hub called SITE, which stands for Social Inclusion through the Digital Economy. And yeah, that's it. Hello.
Hi, my name's Evan Roth. I'm an artist. I work sort of along the lines of new media, graffiti, the web. I'm interested in viral media. I'm interested in open source. And I'm going to be talking about the iWriter project a bit today.
I'm Ray Lucas. I'm lecturer at the Manchester School of Architecture. I've got a background in anthropology, and I've done research projects revolving around the sensory experience of the city, which is what I'm going to be speaking on today.
Yes, so as I was saying before, my name is Lalia Guy. I work at Culture Lab in Newcastle. I'm an RA at the SITES project. And I forgot also to give a bit of my background. I'm an engineer, interaction designer, and new media artist. What I'm going to be talking about today is the notion of urban affordances and creative interactions, and how it can relate to social inclusion as well. So I live in Newcastle, so I don't know how many of you have been there. It's also an industrial city that's been going through a whole phase of urban development, regeneration, and big shifts in its economy. And with that context, the projects that I work in, just catching my breath. So the project that I work in is trying to see how digital technologies and the digital economy can help foster social inclusion. So that's in terms of, for example, enabling elderly people to be more included into society, help them with transportation, help disabled people, but also, for example, youth from difficult social backgrounds, or refugees, immigrants, and such, and make all these groups that somehow have been excluded from decision-making or from public space through different types of mechanism, try to help them sort of reach out and then participate and be empowered into society. So the group that I work in is focusing in particular on creative media, and how creative media can help foster engagement, empowerment, and also socio-economical impact. So we're looking at two different types of users of creative technologies. One of them is youth-led innovations, basically helping young people who have difficulties in terms of economy or access to technology and such, to innovate and to help each other. So basically, for example, young people who have ideas of how to help other young people, we're providing them resources in order to do so through the use of digital technology. And another point that we're looking at is creative engagement. So young people that might not be very active or very socially engaged in other groups than their own social groups that they dwell in, and how they can reach out to the rest of society through creative activities. The design approach that we use is bottom-up, which means that we capitalize on the skills and the knowledge that people already have, and also on the activities that they already are taking part in. So we take value in this, and then together with them, sort of in a participatory design manner, try to foster innovation and social inclusion through that. And doing that, we're collaborating with a series of local organizations who are also already working with different social groups. One of the principles that we're looking at in terms of design is the idea of urban affordances. And this is the idea of sort of using the urban space as a resource, and the activities that are already taking place as a resource in creative engagement with technology. So, I mean, there's different ways of looking at the city. You can have like a top-down approach to it and see it as a map, like the way that you do when you use GPS. It's like a God's view of the place. And you can also look at from the city from the perspective of the people who are actually in there. So a user can get a user bodily centered perspective on the interaction between people and places. So things that are around them, that are surrounding them, objects and interaction that are at hand and how they relate to this space. The principle of urban affordances is inspired by a lot of existing aesthetic practices that are already taking place in urban space, such as graffiti, skateboarding, etc. And in particular, the ideas that emerge from them that are the fact that mobility in itself is a creative act, that the city can be seen as an interface, and for instance, in our case, as a digital interface, and that public space is something that you're not just in, but that you can use in a creative way. So part of my research has been to look at different forms of sort of contemporary graffiti and street art, and in particular, street art that looks at that sort of engage with urban space and contextualize pieces into that urban space and relates to objects that are already there. So that can be, for example, the work of a Parisian graffiti artist, Zeus, who underlines the shadows of permanent objects in public space during the night, so that you can only see his work and understand it at night. So it has a timely element to it. There's another artist whose name I actually forgot, I'm sorry, but who sees things that are broken in public space and then puts bandages on it. There's other artists who are doing 3D type of graffitis that are sort of taking reference of objects that are there, but changing their meaning by adding small elements, for example, changing a tree into an ashtray. There's also an ephemeral quality to a lot of this work, which is that, for example, using instead of using spray can, to use chalk that gets washed down by the rain, or instead of adding layers of information or content on place to remove it, such as this graffiti artist from Brazil who cleans the dirt on the wall and draws in that way instead of drawing on top of it. There's, of course, a lot of different types of users and creative users of public space, such as Reclaim the Street or The Situationist Derive, psychogeography, etc., which is basically movements that are advocating the active, creative use of space, as opposed to just being there or consuming things that are offered to you in public space. I've been studying this sport for a few years, and it's been quite popular lately, especially with YouTube and The Office, etc. The parkour is a French sport that originated in Paris, where they use urban space as a resource for movement. So, for example, fences or urban furnish can be sort of trampolines and different types of objects that you can use for making acrobacies in public space. And yeah, this makes you see urban space not just as a place to be, but a resource for aesthetic movements. So going back to the idea of urban affordances, affordances is defined as the quality of an object, of an environment, that allows an individual to perform an action. So it's basically, let's say that you have a glass of water, the glass of water has a certain shape, it has an opening, and that particular shape and the way that it holds the water affords drinking or tilting. Or a door might afford, for example, pushing because it has a plate in metal, or pulling if there's a handle to it, or pulling down if the handle has a certain shape. So the idea is to see what kind of qualities the urban space has that can sort of afford different types of creative activities or interactions. So if you look at, for example, rhythms that are in public space, or different textures, or signaletics, so organization of space that affords certain movements and stoppings, etc. Different layers of information that are on top of each other in public space. So one of my previous projects that I did a few years ago before starting in the side project was called Sonic City, that I did with Ramya Mazet and Margaret Jacobs. And the idea was to use the urban environment as a musical instrument and to play urban space. So what we did was that we built a sort of a wearable with different sensors that you would wear in the body. And when you're walking in the streets, your interaction with urban space is sort of a musical gesture and creates music as you're walking. So there was a microphone that was taking urban sounds, and based on the movements and the interactions you had on urban space, for example, if you're walking under the shadow or turning corners, or getting close to metallic objects, or jumping, or this type of movements or interactions. The music would change. The sounds from urban space would be processed into music. Yeah, so it's the idea of like walking as a means of creating music. These are some pictures of people using it in Gothenburg in Sweden. Another project I did that's sort of related to it is the idea of context photography, which is to take a picture of not just the visuals of things you see in front of you, but to also incorporate sensory information from the bigger context, the wider context, such as sounds or movements or pollution or these type of things that are going on, and to have that directly translated into the image as you're taking pictures. So, all this project it's also been like a user-centered approach and process in which we've involved local people into the development of the prototypes and also in their testing and taking their opinion into account. There are some pictures. There's another project that also looks at layering of digital information on public space, but alternative ways of interacting with space that are more based on the idea of urban affordances and of existing gestures and meanings that you have. So, for example, this one is it's called Audio Tags, and it's a little box. It's just like a prototype of a locative media system, where instead of accessing information by using a PDA, looking at your screen or looking at your iPhone or whatnot, you would have actually messages be triggered by your presence, and the gesture that you would do in order to listen to it would be to get close to it, the way that you would when someone is telling you a secret. And the walls or the places where you put these little audio tags are playing a sound as you get close to it and telling you something that someone has left behind. Like this. There's another project I did recently that wasn't finished, unfortunately, because of a snowstorm, but that's a long story. It's called Arbre Palabre, which in French means talking tree. And it's based on it's a project that's about immigration and sort of building a community platform for people to share meanings about being away from home or being away from your country. So it's based on the idea on the actual quite universal phenomenon in southern countries of painting trees in white that goes in quite a lot of countries, which also coincidentally are big countries of emigration. So it's something that people from a lot of countries such as like China or countries in West Africa or Mexico or Eastern Europe can relate to and see as a visual cue. And it's basically a physical object that's wrapped around the tree in a bit the same way as this 3D graffiti I was showing you. And that is reminiscent of this form, but at the same time is a physical marker of a digital presence in public space. So I've been experimenting a bit with having people send text messages to the tree and get text messages back a bit in the same way as Yellow Arrows, if you know that project. And also using, this sculpture is made in steel, so using something called a sound bug to attach on the sculpture in order to use it as a resonance board. So you can have like use the tree as a speaker for local radio or different types of messages that people could be leaving. So yeah, that's a bit of background for my work and what's sort of inspiring me at the moment when I'm working on that side project. So at the moment, basically the research that we're doing at the side project has three steps. Which the first step is to collaborate with local organizations and make workshops with young people in order to see how they interact with technologies, how they appropriate it, what kind of ideas they have, how we can help them develop it, and also, basically help them in developing their own ideas. The second part is to have like a more long-term prototype development where they would be taking part in the whole design and technical development, and learn skills, learn how to deal with funders and different types of things like that. And then the third part is to deploy the prototypes that they built on a region-wide scale. We have access to about like 3,000 users across the northeast of the UK. And so this is an example of the type of workshops that we're working on. It's not the actual picture from the workshop because I forgot it in my camera back in Newcastle, sorry. But one of the organizations we work with is called Generator. It's a music agency that promotes music across the UK, and they're based in Newcastle. And they have an urban music training for young people to learn how to deal with music technology and DJ and produce music, electronic music. So one of the things we're doing with them is to have them use their mobile phones or MP3 players of a brand that I won't name, and run a program called RJDJ, which sort of functions in a bit the same way as Sonic City, except that it doesn't have like sort of wearable sensors. And they're using it in the city and producing music out of it, and then figuring out how to make their own program of that kind. And then at the end of that workshop, we'll have a street performance where we'll be using this little sandbox that they've made themselves and use urban space as a resonance board to their music. So we're looking also at how they can be experimenting with not just ways of creating music, but also producing it and performing with it and engaging with public space and with the public around, and see what kind of relation that produces. And, oops, sorry, going backwards. And that was it. So this is my website, leilagay.com. I haven't updated it for a while, so sorry. The side project is side@ac.uk, and Culture Lab, this is the address. And thank you.
I would like to have questions, like a little space of questions for the individual speakers, and then we can make a discussion. So, because otherwise we forget. Okay. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Yes, dear.
How actually have the people in Newcastle engaged with this project?
So which people of Newcastle do?
You're there in Newcastle,
yeah.
You know, bringing all these fantastic, and they are great ideas. People in Newcastle, you know, private economy, are they actually engaging with this, or are they kind of looking at what you're doing and going, do you know what, actually that money could be better spent sorting out a local school?
I mean, there are a lot of organizations who are also looking at how to sort out local schools, etc. But I think the best way to tackle social inclusion is to tackle it from different angles. So there should obviously be a lot of force put into education, into sort of like regeneration of housing, public housing, etc., council housing. But we're just looking at like that particular angle. But so far it's been received quite well, actually a bit too well, because I'm a bit worried about it. Because we were talking about like how it should be about like engaging young people, etc. But the young people that I've been working with so far have been like very engaged. And I wasn't expecting it, so I don't know how to say that. But it's just like they get quite excited about it because probably because we give them like free gears that they can try for a while or something. I don't know, but they seem to be having fun. So yeah. So at the moment we're working with small groups, so we can have like a more like one-to-one relationship with them and have more, instead of like statistics of how people are using things, we can have more rich narratives of interaction. And progressively we're going to expand into wider and wider user groups. And also the idea behind that is that we want the young people that we work with to be involved in the development of technologies and interactions. And it's better to start with a few people and then expand in order to have their ideas be more part of it. So it's not just lost in the big amount of people.
So I just would like to add that's quite interesting what you're saying, because one of the striking things about the history of cities is that what we've learned about the history of cities is that contrary to their structures, nobody actually commanded all the people to come together. That cities were actually constructed out of people wanting to come together. And it's quite interesting also, perhaps in that regard, that all the people come together in the city and are using communicative means necessary for long-distance interaction. So that's sort of like it has to do with the issues of inclusion and exclusion. Yeah. So racing along now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Evan Roth, and then we're going to try to make space for you guys to discuss in a proper way and so on. So write down your questions and look at the themes that are running through here.
Okay, so yeah, my name's Evan Roth. Like I said, I'm an artist. I'm interested in viral media. I'm interested in the web, and I'm interested in public space. Um, I'm going to be talking today mostly about a project that deals with the city and deals with technology. But I also make projects that don't happen in the city. This is a project called White Glove Tracking that was a crowdsourced project where users collected data and then other users made visualizations of that data being Michael Jackson's first live performance of the moonwalk. I've done an open source video for Jay-Z for his for the Red charity. I've done data visualizations related to some of my favorite music of all time. This was a 3-minute album of the curse word content edited down from NWA's Straight Outta Compton album. But I am also interested in graffiti. A lot of my research revolves around graffiti. And I'm interested in approaching graffiti from sort of looking at it as a researcher, because I'm decidedly an outsider to the community in some ways. This project was called Graffiti Taxonomy, which dealt with looking at graffiti as a data set and dealing with formal aspects of graffiti. I'm currently getting reinvested in this project, which is called Graffiti Analysis, which is a data visualization of graffiti. So this is custom software that I'm using to capture graffiti tags with, and then building an open archive of graffiti motion data for others to use, which I'll get into more in a bit. And there's a public space side of that project as well. So I do solo projects, but I also like collaborative work a lot. I co-founded the Graffiti Research Lab, which I'm going to brush on a couple of projects. I've also co-founded the Free Art and Technology Lab, which I'll talk about in a second as well. But the project I want to talk about today, and the reason I'm sort of here at Future Everything, is because I'm part of this team that's developing the iWriter project. And so I thought, rather than get into sort of the specifics of the technical how of the iWriter project, talk more about the story of it, which might be a bit more interesting, how it started, who's involved, where it's been, and kind of where it's going. So I thought I'd start with Graffiti Research Lab, which is an organization that I started with a friend, James Powderly. And the idea was that this lab would be dedicated towards bridging this gap between two communities that I find interesting in the creative field or in the arts, which are computer hackers and graffiti writers. And so it was about getting these two groups collaborating, but it was also about using graffiti as a pop culture mechanism to spread open source into more popular circles. So this is James here on the left. The two of us co-founded this organization back at iBeam in 2005. We did some projects. LED Throwies is one of the more popular earlier projects we did. It was a do-it-yourself project that had to do with how to embed simple electronics into public space work. And we've had sort of GRL cells. We've encouraged people to start their own branches. So there's been these other organizations that we have actually no affiliation with, but that bear our name, that are popping up in different cities all over the world. And one of the projects that's been spreading that is this project called LaserTag. LaserTag is a project that we worked on together with Theo Watson down here at the bottom. Many of you might know Theo. He's an artist, programmer, developer interested in open source. And we got together to make this project called LaserTag, which it's an open source piece of software that basically it co-locates a camera and a video projector so that you can point it at a wall and hand a laser to graffiti writers, and they can do their craft up at a bigger and brighter scale, hopefully. The technology in this piece was supposed to be in the background. Like, you're not supposed to really feel the computer in LaserTag. You just hand someone this laser and they go at the wall. And so this is something that we've been doing we sort of stopped doing recently because it was getting a bit too much, but we were traveling around, meeting with graffiti writers all over the world and doing these performances that were at times public and at times just private. We'd go out with graffiti writers. And so this is an open source project, like a lot of the other work I do, whether it's my solo work, whether it's collaborative. Just about every project I'm a part of, it has some sort of open component. So LaserTag has software, LED Throwies have how-to guides, and so whether it's software, whether it's a hardware project, I'm interested in sort of spreading these ideas and inviting participation. So how this connects to the iWriter project is, back in 2008, James and I were doing a LaserTag performance in North Carolina, in the States. And it was a LaserTag performance like many others. We invite graffiti writers, we have graffiti writers do their thing. We try to encourage political discourse, especially as it relates to copyright. but we're always handing over the laser to other people, so these events are mostly about getting other people writing whatever comes to their mind. And at the end of that event, this guy, Mick Ebling, approached us, who was a stranger at the time, and he had just come from a benefit for a graffiti artist with ALS named Tempt One, just a week before our laser tag event, and his mind was kind of putting these two things together, and he was kind of the bridge in the initial starting of this project, where he just said, basically, like, I think, you know, you guys did this crazy laser tag project. I just came from this benefit with this graffiti writer who's paralyzed. Like, I think if anyone could help him out, you guys could. And so James and I left, but we were thinking about that, and we decided it seemed like a good project to jump into, and so we thought the first thing that we should do is form a team, right? And so we reached out to Zach Lieberman. Probably a lot of you know Zach's work. He's an artist and an animator and a programmer. He was my thesis advisor when I was in school. He was also Theo's thesis advisor, and he's a brilliant programmer. So we reached out to Zach. We also reached out to Chris Segru, who's another artist programmer. Chris lives in Madrid, and she graduated with Theo and I, and her thesis project was in open frameworks and dealing with eye tracking. And so the five of us started talking, and the five of us are friends, but we also overlap in other ways. Theo and Zach co-founded Open Frameworks, which, if you're not familiar with, it's an open source C++ toolkit. It's a coding for artists. Chris is a big open frameworks guru. So James and I, we co-founded this Graffiti Research Lab organization. Theo's been a long-time collaborator in that project. And the five of us also are sort of card-carrying members of the Free Art and Technology Lab, which is about bridging this gap between open source and popular culture. And the last member of the team is Tony Kwan, who's an artist and activist. He's most widely known for being a very influential graffiti writer in Los Angeles in the 90s. The crew, his sort of team of graffiti writers, were credited with being some of the first people to start experimenting with using the LA freeway system as a mechanism for disseminating art back in the 90s. And they abused that system to great ends. But he's an artist, and he talks about his craft being the letter form. So he's interested in taking the Roman alphabet and twisting it. And so the sixth member of this team is Tony. Like, in the beginning, we really thought this project was about making something for him. I'm going to talk a little bit today about how it turned into more him being this other member, making this tool. He's a part of the team building this for other people. So the team of us crewed up, and we formed the Voltron of the iWriter project. And so we emailed this guy, Mick, and we said, we want to make this happen. What's the next step? And he said, well, I think probably you should come out to LA. And so Mick, he runs this company called Ebling Group, and they funded our plane tickets over there. Mick put us up in his house. And so we came to LA for the first time because all of us live all over the world. I was living in Hong Kong at the time, James was in London, Zach was in New York, Chris is in Madrid, Theo was in Amsterdam. So we work collaboratively online, but flying into LA, we sort of have a 10-day sort of think tank on the project. And so we were looking at hardware solutions, we were dealing with interface design solutions, and we were dealing with eye tracking, of course. And so that it kind of looked like this. We were just this was their living room that we sort of took over for a week. And one of my roles in the project is I'm interested in viral media and how, as artists, we can use viral media to spread things besides lolcats. Not that I don't love lolcats, but we can use these sort of systems of networks on the web to spread other ideas and things we're interested, like open source and like accessibility. And so one thing I was doing was shooting video. I was shooting video all day, and then I'd stay up all night and edit these videos, and I was releasing these videos daily to sort of document the process. And this footage, it's a little bit hard to see, is from the last 2 days of this first trip we were there, where we had set up the laser tag system and invited some of Tony's friends and old graffiti writing friends, and so they were writing laser tag, and you could kind of see, Tony could see this wall from his window at the hospital room, and we were also beaming back some of the first tests of the iWriter project.
Known him for since our teenage years. I'm now 37, and Yave Uno, and we actually had some great experiences, man. He's funny because when you go up there and you talk to him, he's totally involved in the conversation, and he's got his humor's still the same. He hasn't changed, you know. And it's just great that this is going on because it's going to give him a chance to express himself, man. It's going to be a touchy moment for me, really, truly.
And he can see from the window. So they were sort of catching tags, and Tony's room was up here, and so every once in a while we'd send some of the really early tests back from the first version of this iWriter software, so that they were sort of him and his friends communicating in the same visual language using very different technologies. And so the first system worked sort of like this. This is the sort of beta version that we made after that first week, and it was a more gestural version of the iWriter, where the eye is moving and every movement of the eye makes a line. And so the first versions of those drawings were looking like this. These were some of the ones coming straight from Tempt using the iWriter software. And it's definitely not perfect, but you can see some of his original tags on the left and these early first tests of projecting on the right. And even though it was not perfect, you can already see some of the connections, right, in the way the T's are being made. And he's getting back into drawing for the first time. He told us this was the first time that he'd drawn anything in like 7 years. So we left LA and we continued to sort of work like this in Skype chat windows for a while. We were getting a lot of feedback from Tony, and you know, this is where we realized Tony was a team member and not like a client. Like, he was just like, look, you guys, I love this thing, but it's a little bit fucked up. Like, this doesn't look good, my T's don't look good, these connections don't look good, we need to come up with a different system. And so we wanted to go back to LA to do another test, because it's important to be there like with him in the room and like testing and really seeing how these things are working. So we reached out to this guy, who's Sven Travis. Sven is the dean of the School of Art and Media Technology at Parsons in New York, where I teach and Zach teaches and some other people here teach. And Sven's a cool guy, and he was like, okay, I'll give you guys plane tickets. So we went back for another trip to LA. This is the video that's in the gallery here. You might have seen online. Most of this footage is from the second sort of 10-day trip we had in LA. So maybe I'll play just a little bit of this and then talk over it. So the last couple of days of this second trip, this is footage from a night we went out. We had two sort of teams. We had one team in the room with Tony in his hospital, and one team driving around LA looking for nice spots along the freeway with an internet connection. And Tony would make drawings using this new system, and he would upload them to a server. We would download them and then project them. But we also had a live web stream on the walls where we were projecting them. So Tony had this nice setup where he could catch his sort of tag on one monitor and then look over on the other one and see a live feed of it being projected back up in the city. So I'll keep going, this video is online. But the way this second version of the software was working is, instead of being a more gestural system that's recording like the movement of the eye, it's working more like plotting points like you would in Illustrator. So it was a trade-off between what a lot of graffiti writers are interested in is this movement and this gesture, and how there's a speed component of graffiti and how the time of it being written relates to the way it looks on the wall. And so in the beginning we were trying to really get that into it, because we've worked with graffiti writers in the past, we know this is important. But another thing that's important is they don't want their stuff to look like shit, right? And so Tony was on that side, and he was saying, I'd rather trade speed for precision. And so you can see this video is really sped up. So this is like a 35-minute video. And so it takes much, much longer, but he's able to get things that are much closer to what he has sort of in his head. And so these are kind of some of the outputs that he's been getting with the iWriter now. And if you look at some of, the image on the left is from some of his sketchbooks from back in the day, and the image on the right is output from the iWriter. So while it's still not perfect, like you can see he's like getting closer and closer to getting his style back. And so we kind of, the crew of us on the team, we all have our own art practices and our own careers. We travel around a lot, and we've been trying to throw up Tempt wherever we go. These are images from Vienna. We threw them up in Japan. But besides being a public space project, there's also this open source component. And so we're trying to get more and more developers involved, more people interested in digging their hands into the code. So we have the code online, but beyond it being open source on the software side, we're trying to make it open on the data side as well. So one thing that I've been really interested in working on is this graffiti markup language, which Theo and Chris have also been involved with, which is basically like a new standard for vandals. It's like an XML standardized form, but that's being common between all these different applications that I'm a part of and that other members of the team are a part of. So now, whether you're writing data from the iWriter or from LaserTag or from graffiti analysis or from many other applications that we're building and that friends are building, they all write to this common data set that's recording position as well as time. And it's being stored on a server that's free to upload, and so the server is hosting the data. It's also hosting a collection of all these applications that are open and free that run this data. And so again, it's about like getting computer hackers and graffiti writers working together. Just to give a couple quick examples of how this system can work. This is like a stupid tweet I made recently, where I was like, this was like right after Christmas. So I was just joking like, I wanted this for Christmas, I didn't get it, tweet. But I forgot that really smart people are following me on Twitter, like Golan Levin. And so Golan saw that, and he was like, I got one of those robots laying around Carnegie Mellon. And so Golan, I think it was less than 2 weeks after I made that tweet, he sent me this video, which is a robot taking GML data that Tempt had written from the iWriter and actually writing it out in physical space. This was like the first time Tony's, had ink come from his mind and show up on the wall, right? And when he saw this video, he was like really excited, and he was almost freaked out that the way that the robot drew it was actually almost the same stroke paths that he was using when he would write this. So this was the first time this had happened, and since then there's been other examples. I'm not going to show all of them, but this is another example by an artist named Benjamin Goulan, who did a project called Printball, which is a roboticized paintball gun that can load in images. And I got in contact with him through a friend, and I was like, man, it'd be great if we could change your device over so it could read in GML files from Tony, and he was on it, and within a couple of months, he had this system working. So this is him shooting out a temp tag that Tony had drawn with his eyes. And so the system of this shared data is sort of working. So there's artists collaborating on this data set now. But beyond the digital side, there's also analog collaborations. There's people that have been painting temps tags. This is a tag that he drew with the iWriter that was painted by an artist in Japan. This is one that I painted in Vienna based on his input. This is a graffiti artist named Ms. Justice in Vienna, where Tony sent a JPEG and she painted it and then also worked in her sort of graffiti stylings to the background. So there's collaborations happening digitally and in paint. But besides collaborations between artists, we also are really trying to encourage collaborations with developers. It's an open source project. We're trying to get more and more developers involved. We need really smart people. So we're also reaching out to people on that end. Some of the biggest sort of momentum that's been happening recently is Zach's been teaching a class at Parsons dedicated to the iWriter, which just ended last week, and they've been having like a three-pronged approach. They've been dealing with new hardware design, so they're coming up with more robust systems for making these head mounts. They've been experimenting with co-located projector systems. There's been a team working on the code, so they're looking at different algorithms. They've been looking at glint detection, at bright eye algorithms, and they're close to having a system that will no longer need the glasses. So this is a version that can run from a webcam with some infrared lights. And there's people on the interface design side, so they're experimenting with different keyboard layouts that are based on scaling the keys based on frequency of use. And so these are just different ideas that they're experimenting with. One of the more exciting things that we'll be releasing soon is the ability to leave the iWriter application. So you can launch it and then use your eyes to minimize the app and do other things like browse the web, pull up web browsers, control Windows, control OS X, hopefully control Ubuntu. So this is sort of the next phase of the iWriter project that we're moving into now. So this tool that was originally made to write graffiti will hopefully be able to write emails. We've been getting in a lot of emails to the website that are a mix of like very excited and sometimes very sad, but there's not a lot of like graffiti writers, of course, writing into the website saying like, I have Lou Gehrig's disease and I want to catch tags. But there's a ton of people writing in saying, I have a loved one that I want to be able to write emails to. And so this is the next step, and this is the next section of the project that we're trying to move forward in. And so for the team of us working on this, is this nice example of a project that started with one person making a very specific tool, making a graffiti software for someone in this very specific situation, and how it really changed from being something we were making for him to being this group effort where Tony's now a part of the team, and he's really working towards making this a more general tool with us that hopefully can make this kind of software more accessible to people that can't afford the 10,000 pound price tags that come along with medical computing devices. So that's the current state of the project. So thank you all. Thanks to Future Everything. If there's any developers that you know that are into eye tracking, there's more info here. If you send an email to the info@iWriter, it goes to the five of us, me, Theo, Zach, Chris, James. Yeah, and if you want to get in touch with me, my email's here, or you can, I'm feeling lucky, Google, I'm a badass motherfucker. So thank you. I think for us, when we started the project, we didn't set out to make an eye tracking project that was going to, we had ambitions that this was going to, we knew it was going to be an open source project, so we had hopes that it would sort of turn into something else. But in the beginning, we really were just trying to help this one person, and I think that helped things too, because it helped it stay more focused on him and more focused on what he wanted rather than us projecting what this might be. And then I think we were also sort of blessed in the sense that graffiti writers tend to be pretty active and ambitious people. Like, it takes a lot of personal momentum to write your name like 1 billion times around a city. And so he still has some of that too. And so we were sort of blessed in that sense that he's really, really active and engaged, and he's not afraid to call us out when we make missteps, which is nice too. I mean, it's probably a hard situation for him because I know that he's very grateful also. I mean, I know that he's told us before, the ability to draw again is just huge for him. And so I think he's probably in a weird situation where he probably has more thoughts than he's telling us, but he's definitely not afraid to tell us when he thinks we're going the wrong direction or that we could be doing something else. And I think having that strength has been something that's been huge for the project, because it'd be easy not to say that, it'd be easy to sort of sit back and let the project go where it ends up going, but he's kind of been making big moves that have changed the direction of it. So this has been the only time I've had that. This is the only project I've been involved that's like this. So my experience with it may have been easy in that sense that we got lucky with the right people.
Well, with this project, it's probably worth having a slight sort of introduction to where I've come from and also the origins of this project. I struggled slightly with this talk in terms of giving something of the appropriate length and also editing out a lot of the theoretical baggage that comes along with it. So what I'm hoping to concentrate on is particularly the system that was developed within this project, and possibly touching on some of the theoretical content that drives it as we go along with that. But this project is very much part of my own research. I started out as an architect, and then for my PhD research went into anthropology, where I worked on a project which was looking at the nature of creativity. My own project within this was to understand what we called inscriptive practices or graphic practices and how they're connected to creative acts. One thing that I actually promised myself within this context that I would never ever do was to then develop my own notational system. Obviously, that came to pass as a sort of prediction for my future. This project itself was conducted for the UK's HRC and EPSRC on a scheme called Designing for the 21st Century, which had quite a strong technological focus to it. Something that we ended up rejecting to quite a large degree. But the project set out with the aim of thinking about the assumed visual bias in urban design. Now it's important just to briefly underline that the project was focused on urban design rather than architecture, so looking at that sort of broad range of built environment disciplines. Urban design really looks at the idea of public spaces such as the streetscape, the public squares, all those spaces between buildings essentially, but also the patterns that those buildings actually form, the sort of urban fabric itself, rather than the specific piece of architecture. So part of the team for this, we had a product designer as part of the team, who had experience on working on multimodality. We also had an urban designer, an urban theorist, architectural historian, and myself. We had various other people on an advisory board, including environmental psychologists. It's quite interesting that I've been thrown into a panel on visioning the city, because we have this approach which says that we put too much focus on what the city looks like and upon vision in the design process of these environments. The image that's at the background of this slide here is from one of the major shrines in Tokyo, in Asakusa, the sort of downtown, more working class district. So it's taken in January, just after New Year, when the temple at Sensoji, which has an enormous sort of long approach, an almost medieval marketplace atmosphere, although the goods on sale can, as easily be Godzilla toys as sort of ceremonial items. At the top of this axis, you have a collection of food stalls competing with the incense burners and the cool water that are part of the ceremony here. So you have all these smells, you have thermal information coming at you, you have tastes associated with the place. There's also, bright colours, a particular geometrical arrangement of space, and all these things would largely be left off of traditional urban design representations. This stall was just arranged out of tarpaulin. The noise, you don't get a real appreciation of just what's going on in this kind of space, all the senses acting as one. So this is the kind of deficit that we thought urban designers ought to be able to work to remedy. The first sort of, I'll come back to this quote, but the first idea was that while there are some recording devices available for visual and oral phenomena, these are quite specific mediated technologies, and recording a range of phenomena quite passively in a manner that's quite unlike human perception. Recording devices for movement are even more problematic, requiring quite complex video and motion capture technology that's really not workable in a complex urban environment. Even more so, the chemical senses of taste and smell are much more problematic. And while some analysis of these sensations can be achieved, the technology is again unsuitable for urban environments. Tactile elements are very difficult to record without recourse to translations into visual patterns representing textures. Tech rarely sketches with a light meter in their hand. They don't need to know, those absolute values of light in order to think about, the vibrancy of the colours, the transparency, all these different things that contribute to this experience. Architectural writers like Christian Norberg Schultz talk about the way in which, really quite similar spatial organisations can be completely different from one another. So how do we begin to represent this in the design process? One of our main sources was psychologist James Gibson, and one of the, and it's interesting that we've spoken already about affordance, which is one of his key theories. But another thing that he introduced was the idea that experimental psychology essentially tried to eradicate the context from its understanding of sensory experience. They would have setups in sterile environments so that we didn't, let the outside intrude and colour the results of the experiments. And he argued that there's no way to discuss perceptual experience without being firmly grounded in context. And this is something which essentially sets up perception not as a passive reception of outside phenomena, but an active seeking of something to understand. You know, that the senses are active, they're actually, you know, looking, you know, it's an activity, it's not just receiving light or sound or smells. So he organised, rather than the sort of classical notion of the five senses that we have, he organised these perceptual systems, from the basic orienting system down to the visual system. But, you know, interestingly, the language is all about attention. It's about listening, touching, smelling, tasting, looking, etc. For our project, we essentially played around with these and thought about what perceptual systems are most appropriate to the urban realm, which caused us to split down the tactile sense much more and to amalgamate the taste and smell. So for our purposes, we had the visual, you know, which has to include all the effects of light, just the qualities of colour, which are so often left off of our design projects. We were quite interested in the kinetic. Some of the notational approaches that we took had a great deal of work in common with people like Rudolf von Laban, who produced fantastic movement notations. But it's essential to understand the quality with which people are moving in a space. You can take the example of the subway system in Tokyo and compare that with the subway system in New York or London or Paris. And whilst they have many aspects in common in terms of their geometry, you know, just the pure sort of crystalline hard form, the experience of being there is entirely different, down to all sorts of other perceptual content, be these the movement of the crowds, the way in which people comport themselves differently in these environments, or just the way they're decorated, or the way in which people actually inhabit these spaces. Obviously the chemical, the combination of scent and taste, is very hard to divide those two senses in a lot of ways. And at the scale that we were talking about, it seemed obvious to us that combining scent and taste into a chemical sense was the most appropriate thing to do. The oral, again, as experienced in the urban realm, we introduced the idea of the thermal as a specific sort of subset of tactility because of the huge importance of the presence of heat sources, of places that are deliberately cooled down, the idea of wet and dry and so on. And we'll see that in some of the examples at the end. And finally, the tactile, both, you know, things felt with the hands, but also the feel that you get through the feet as walking around the urban environment, or, you know, any of those other ways of touching and sensing the environment. But the idea of attention always returns, and we constructed a way of observing, a way of being in the environment that allowed us to engage with it in a particular way. The first part of this was to think about the location, to simply plot the site, whether it's part of a route or a static position, given details such as time, date, and weather. We would use descriptor terms from quite a tight list that I'll show you in a second to characterise each of these 6 perceptual systems: the visual, the oral, the olfactory, the tactile, thermal, and kinetic. The main graphic step that we took the form of a radar diagram. Again, I'll show you this shortly, which was mainly to actually not notate each of the senses separately, but to actually think about which one was dominant, which ones were of equal value to one another. You know, in I'll talk through some examples with that. It's probably the best way. You know, it's always contextualised. It's very hard to do in the abstract. Another issue we were interested in was corroboration, the way in which an environment is a much more complete experience when several senses verify one another. So that if you can see the thing that's making a noise, then, you know, if it's the wind blowing a tree and you hear the rustling of the leaves, then that is a much more embedded experience for you. And it seemed important to actually notate where these corroborations happen, or even when they're denied, such as in a railway station public announcement system. It's very hard to pinpoint where that's coming from because it's an ambient sound. And finally, some qualities of the temporality, such as repetitions, singularity, etc. But the descriptor terms that we used were kind of selected based on one part of Laban notation originally, to try and be as unmetaphorical as possible, and to give us a series of oppositions that just further help to describe in a shorthand what the qualities of each sensation actually are. The problem is creating a very narrow set of these, and it's something that we spent a long time narrowing down and opening out again, so much so that we introduced a much more narrative element to the notation later on. This narrative was strongly influenced by Georges Perec, an essayist and novelist. And it's worth just reading through this, where in an essay on the street, he asks us to observe the street from time to time with some concern for system, perhaps. Apply yourself and take your time. Note down the place, the time, the date, the weather. Note down what you can see, anything worthy of note going on. Do you know how to see what's worthy of note? Is there anything that strikes you? Nothing strikes you. You don't know how to see. You must write it. You must write about it out more slowly, almost stupidly. Force yourself to write down what is of no interest, what is most obvious, most common, and most colourless. So, the basic graphic step of this is the radar chart or spider diagram or whatever other name you want to give this very, very simple notation. And we went through so many iterations of very, very complex notations. A lot of it was based on Laban originally, but it just was too cumbersome and didn't allow us the flexibility that something as simple as this affords. And you simply draw a line to say which sense is the most important. Sometimes this is obvious, sometimes it's not. In a really dreadful shopping mall, all sensations might score a 2, for example, because there's just nothing worthy of note. Other places you might have several things that are competing, several things that are demanding attention at once, and these can be sort of sites of sensory overload. Corroboration is very, very simply added to that diagram, just with a dotted arc showing that in this case the source of the thermal sensation is something that is being touched. The temporal indicators are just little symbols, a very short set of symbols saying whether something is situated, singular, constant, directional, repetitive, or ambient. So that the whole key for these diagrams can essentially be written down on a single piece of A4. So far we've tested this with various groups of academics and students from a number of different disciplines. We've not yet taken it into the professional environment, but the aim for it is that it is actually quite a pragmatic way of understanding the sensory experience of a place. What we're producing for this is a design guide which has a series of essays explaining the approach to sensory experience with the guide to the notation, and then taking a cue from Christopher Alexander, the idea of a pattern book or a sketchbook, where in the first instance we're taking 5 or 6 different cities and giving 10 worked examples from each of these. And this is almost a suggestion to the designer that as they go along, they produce their own pattern book. They sketch environments. They use the system both as a recording device, but also as a diagnostic tool. So when you're in somewhere which is an engaging environment, you want to be able to record why it's so engaging. But also, when you're actually working with a live site, you want to be able to record various approaches to that site, be they routes through it or points around a specific place. And what that allows you to do is to pick out where there are deficits, where there are particular problems. If there's a sense which is too strong or unpleasant, then it allows you to actually, it focuses your attention on those particular problems. One important thing with the system is to work with existing forms of inscriptive practice. So in this case, the plan and the section. This example is of a deli in Rome. And you see there's a variety of photographs. There's a long piece of text which approaches the situation in the manner suggested by Perec, but also with reference to authors such as Calvino or even Borges. But the idea is just to see what's happening, to really attend to what's going on. In this case, there's some flexibility in the notation, which sees that there's an important aspect of the chemical sense that needs to be expanded. There are 3 separate strands on it's not very clear on the projection, but there's extra strands added to the diagram to cope with the fact that there is separate meaty, bready, and cheesy smells within this place that are dominating. Another example from Tokyo, the sort of electronic town district, where there's obviously a lot of noise, a lot of neon, a lot of people on the street with microphones and sort of personalised PA systems, but also the effect of walking down a street and essentially having a mix of music provided by just walking down the street in a particular way from one shop to another. This is the example of the temple in Asakusa, the Sensoji. So you have this long boulevard, which takes you up towards the main temple. And again, the projector's letting us down here, but you have a series of gates. You have the elevation. You have various perspectives. You have quite a complex visual scene, but also you have various sort of thermal elements here and here with a large incense burner, and also a ritual pool of cold water. And then there's all these flavours happening at the same time. It's an incredibly complex scene. Again, one of the classic images of Tokyo is Shibuya Crossing. We've taken examples from Boston, from Rome, from Edinburgh, Tokyo and Jakarta for this project. We also have a colleague who's conducted a similar sort of sensory audit in Nanjing in China, and we've had people doing notations around Glasgow, Aberdeen and various other UK cities as well. And it's proven to be of some interest to groups of anthropologists as well as architects and urban designers. So to date we've published sort of various papers on this, including hosting a conference in 2008 on the topic. Just to wrap up, but there's clearly a great deal of power in representation, and the form that a representation actually takes is quite telling on the thought processes involved. These are far from neutral. Representation is understanding something by reproducing it. In much the same way as a painter, no matter how much realism is attempted, you cannot hope to entirely capture every detail in a scene, meaning that choices have to be made. And the choices of what to leave in and what to omit are central to all acts of representation. This problematises the entire endeavour of producing a notational system for the non-visual sensory modalities. This problematic does not, of course, mean that we ought to abandon the project, but rather that we remain mindful that every decision on how to represent influences what we actually record and depict. This project asks if there is something inherent to design that marks it out as a visual discipline. The majority of tools that we use to design are visual. Drawings and models are all representations of the way something looks on some level. Of course, there is more to the traditional representations than this. And drawings such as plans depict the relationships and thresholds between areas. Section drawings tell us a great deal about volumes and massing, but the information is fundamentally visual. One reason for this is the false totality presumed by visual representation. The second most common sensory modality is distinctly temporal in its nature, in that sound takes time to play out. So a sound cannot ever be apprehended as a whole. Visual representation of sound, such as musical notation or waveforms, are one aid to this, and it is possible to compose a score working entirely with the notation, or to mix samples viewing the waveforms and matching them up. The totality available through visualization is what makes it such a valuable tool for design. It is, of course, possible to design sound or other context-dependent sensory environments through experimentation and physical manipulation of stimuli in a space. But this is ultimately much more expensive and time-consuming, requiring a great deal of equipment and technology to achieve the flexibility offered by a simple blank sheet of paper. And that's essentially the aim of this project, is to allow designers to approach the whole range of the senses and their experience of place in the design process. So I think I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Do you have any questions? Yes, dear.
I'd like to ask, because it's the actual radio part, it's also a stand-alone thing, without narration. Does it possible to then basically used in a different way for data visualization or parametric design? So, do you think it could be a standalone device?
I do think that, but maybe not in the way that you suggest. One thing that we're investigating is moving more towards crowdsourcing with it to produce larger sensory maps of cities, where you would have a simple mobile app where you can quite quickly notate, a position in the city, and then over time you would get various people's opinions of that space, and you would get an aggregate of how they feel about that place and develop a larger scale sensory map of the city. I think there's a danger with parametric design, though.
It was only an example.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. What you suggested is right, but basically use it as a data.
Well, I think the problem in this case with parametric design, though, is quite instructive, because the system, it doesn't differentiate between, say you have a very strong smell of some beautifully baked bread on a street. It doesn't differentiate between that high priority sense and an open sewer. It doesn't actually make those judgment calls on the graphic version of it. So that's a problem with the parametric design, that it would generate results that maybe aren't intended.
Okay, go ahead.
I just wondered, how do you do the subjectivity of mapping that data of one person's to an environment and saying this is it's a nice smell or a poor smell or whatever? How do you deal with that subjectivity of that data information coming to the person who's recording the data?
Well, the subjectivity thing is something that simply can't be avoided. So we decided not to even attempt that, and the narratives are, the model that we have is the sketchbook and the architect or urban designer sketchbook, which is again quite a subjective activity. So that kind of judgment call is always included in the narrative. Those large pieces of text, which I think are really focused by the by this the structuring of attention that's spoken about in the system. And I think that sort of structuring, that way of making sure that you attend to the environment, is actually the most important thing about this. That in a way the actual notational system is quite arbitrary, and we could probably refine that and come up with other ways of actually putting it down. We have quite a simplistic graph, but what the graph allows us to do is to say, layer them up as transparencies across a route and see, you know, the change in the geometry that's produced by that simple chart can show you that, you know, a route is primarily quite visual. So you might want to understand, you know, what else is happening, or how to enrich that route might be something non-visual. You know, you might begin to introduce something oral or something to do with the experience of moving through the space. Rather than, you know, the perspective or the flatness of the space or whatever other visual qualities that you identify. So yeah, it was quite an early decision not to make judgment calls on the graphic part of it, and to actually say that with the text. One of the things we just kept coming up against is the absolute flexibility that writing offers you. You know, you can't get away from that sometimes. So then it became about talking about attention and having these visual aids and this integration with other forms of inscriptive practice, such as, you know, the plan and the section. Does that answer?
Yeah, thanks, Raymond. I'm really fascinated, actually, by the way this relates to other sort of literary forms of ways of capturing or understanding the movements through cities. I'm interested in relation to Raymond Williams's work on literary form and the way they may capture our understanding of the ways we are together as people in cities. That kind of data seems to be absent from the notational form that you've produced. I wondered whether this ever figured in your thinking about what should be captured.
The project that we were set was specifically to do with the senses, but my colleague on the project, Umberta Romici, is an urban designer, and she has worked on another reason for this diagram is that it dovetails really nicely with work that she's done on community engagement, where precisely those issues are actually charted in the same way, so that it becomes a parallel process and it uses similar diagramming techniques. So that's an additional part of it, and we can also use this technique within that community engagement process. The reason I didn't speak about that is that we've not done it yet, but it certainly is a potential for us to work with that kind of community engagement project, where the problem is always about eliciting responses from people, because frankly they're not design professionals or design trained, so it's a way of actually accessing how they experience their environment, what they want and what they need, without actually just getting that sort of, you know, first response of, you know, what do you want, and people generally go, oh, I don't know, or, you know, something like, you know, this, you know, some example that they've already seen, where what they actually need is something completely different from anything that's out there at the moment. So it does potentially work with these much better considered community engagement projects.
So I thank you all for coming so early in the morning, and let's give an applause to our